Hello, hello, hello. Today I'm talking with Samantha Glibert. We talked about always having a backup plan, thinking fast, and creating space for others.
I'm Ivanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello everyone, and hello Samantha. I think that's how I should pronounce your name, correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's perfect.
And before we jump into everything, let's also show a little bit on where we are. And I'm in Ghent, Belgium, and we're moving not that far away because we're staying in Belgium, but we go to Vieux-Genappe.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
nice. Yeah, that's how you pronounce it indeed.
Indeed. Or at least some of the years of my French did with me. So Samantha, before we jump, and we're recording this. Well, it's 10 minutes after 8 or 11 minutes after 8. And what's the time on your side?
That's exactly the same. Crazy.
Because we're in the same small country, so we don't have multiple time zones in Belgium. For the few people that don't know that, in Europe, a lot of us are in the same time zone, but especially in Belgium, this is a country with just one time zone. Um, Samantha, before we jump into the questions, what do you want people to know about you?
What do I want people to know?
Well, yeah, it's
Let
your choice what you say.
I would say let's start with the basics. What to know about me? So, I'm 30 years old. I do not have kids besides my cats. So I'm kind of that kind of person,
A cat
that kind
lady.
of cat lady. Yeah, exactly. I have three older sisters, and I'm the youngest, of course. And I started working, so now I'm a Scrum Master, but interestingly enough, I started working as a data analyst more than 6 years ago. And then a lot of things happened, and I had a career switch about a year and a half ago as a Scrum Master. Uh, Also, to know, I'm a big fan of games, whether it's board
Hmm.
games or video games. And I recently discovered an interest in roller skate. So I'm starting to take lessons, and I'm hoping that soon enough I will be able to roller dance. That's a bit my
Hmm.
goal for next year. Who knows?
Wow, already some really interesting changes looking ahead.
Yeah.
Um, Roller dancing. That's lovely. I'm trying to think. There was one person, Jan Dobbelaar, that I interviewed who was doing a lot of rollerblading ever since he was young. And he's, I don't know, I think somewhere between the two of us in age. And he recently picked it up again and started to rollerblade again. So, yeah, it's nice to sometimes see people again being active one way or another. So, yeah, that is indeed some very nice. And I guess in some of the other things we'll jump into when we're talking about the questions with everything else that
Yeah,
we're talking
definitely.
about. So let's jump into that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Um, that's actually, well, my answer is going to be very personal, of
Hmm.
course, but I'm going to go right ahead. So I mentioned I have three older sisters. That means that the age difference between me and the youngest is 11 years old. So
Wow.
I grew up, I want to say a bit by myself, but it's not true. I was in a loving family, but still, that means that I had often, well, moments where I had to play by myself. And that allowed me to explore a bit. I think that's where it comes from, the area of gaming. For example, we had a lot of board games that you, of course, cannot play by yourself, and I would find ways to use it to be able to play by myself, or
Mhm.
to just invent scenarios where I would use it differently. And I think that's really shaped how I approach things at work or in personal life, to tweak things that exist to adapt to a certain situation or a context. And that's actually something that I've been doing since I'm young. So I guess that's something that I learned.
Because indeed, I can imagine by the time you're 5 or 6 and that you're interested in board games or whatever, the other kids are like, well, going out or yeah, I don't know, even studying maybe already, and so yeah, they might be from time to time interested in doing some babysitting, but that's about it. I can imagine that is for them it felt like, it's nice to have a little sister, but at the same time, like I want to have my independent life because now I'm a teenager or something like
Yeah,
that.
exactly, exactly. And another thing that shaped as well, if I have to extend that, is the fact that around me, well, people were much older. So I was also more into more mature conversation or more
Mm.
into listening, trying to understand situations. Well, we can argue into how is that a nice approach for a kid, but still growing up, I had more and more connection with even more well, adults and older people, because then I could understand a bit the different discussions, and not only talk about, well,
And did your siblings allow you to listen in? Because I can imagine that at the age of, I don't know, somewhere between 12, 18, that you were always like, oh, you're a little bit annoying, or how did that went? Do you, if you
that's
want to
an
talk about
yeah,
that?
no, that's an interesting question, because so indeed, sometimes I think it was allowed, or they were just discussing in family dinner, it was little things. Other times what they would do is they would switch to English when I was
Mm.
about like 10 years old or 12 years old. And I remember that because that's how I decided to learn English, because I was frustrated to not understand what they were talking about. And I remember like looking at, we had DVDs of movies that I liked, and just I knew them by heart. So I would switch them to English just to understand a bit, okay, what are the words? And then I started to catch up a phrase or two when they were like, wait, what? You understood? So that's why I'm laughing, because yeah, they were actually trying to be like, don't listen to us. And I
Okay.
just adapted
I,
to understand.
This reminds me of when we had our first child. I don't know the age, but it was somewhere between 3 and 5. I think that I did the same thing with my partner. That we want to discuss about the child, and we didn't want him to hear, or we did want to discuss. And at some point, we discussed. We said we were talking about him, but we didn't mention his name. And all of a sudden, he's asking in Dutch, people, is that me? So he kind of understood that we use the word people, which is a clown, to talk about him. And even at the age of 3, not understanding the sentence, he immediately grabbed on, hey, this word, you're really there talking about me. And it's like, oh God, even that talking in English, it's at a very young age, probably a little bit similar like you, listening in and then understanding some parts. Yeah, maybe even with television as well. It's yeah, it's incredible, and it also shows the drive, I think, that young children have to be part of, to belong, basically, yeah? And to understand what people are talking about. Yeah, it's interesting. Um, but I can imagine that creates both the frustration parts and also the kind of, okay, let's tag you along, and okay then, because yeah, you were still part of the family at the dinner table and everywhere else, so yeah, you had to listen into some of their conversations, of course.
Yeah.
And did you at many times felt like, really like, oh, I am the youngest, I'm the smallest, because of that age difference, or was did you?
I think I did, because they would often actually put back the context, because otherwise I would start being very mature and then trying to participate to conversation to my level. But I remember I would like already try to be part of it, and then they would put back like, yeah, okay, but you're but 10 years old, or you're they would bring back the fact that I was actually just a kid. But I
Mhm.
think for me, I just tagged along, and I didn't. I mean, I forgot a bit the
The
age
age
difference as I
difference.
was committed to the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that that plays well. I don't know. I don't. I Yeah. I was the oldest in a family of 3, so I don't know. But my father, for example, was the youngest of 17, so really large family. And being the youngest, that means that there was an age difference of, I think, more than 20 years between his oldest brother and him. Of course, by that time, that person most of the time wasn't even at home anymore because he was already working. But still, there was, with a lot of other children, a big difference in age. But there was so many gradations that, yeah, I don't know if that if he felt in the same kind of way. But it's interesting to think about that, the age difference, and even especially when you're young. I mean, once you get after a certain age, you might still feel the difference, but I guess it might be less. Or is it with your siblings? How is it now? Do you feel more leveled out or not?
That's a really good question. Um, I think so. Actually, I think now I feel it because we talk about things about life, about career, about wishes, and there is this big difference. Like my oldest sister is going to be 50 soon, and they all have kids, they all have a house. So it's you have the discussions, and I have the enthusiasm and the dreams of a 30-year-old apparently. So that's where we have the discussion, and it's like, oh yeah, we do have a difference, a big difference in age, but so I guess it does pop up more now than it used to be, at least the way I feel it
Because
when we
they're
have a
different in a
conversation.
different part of their life already, or still
Yeah,
they were always in a different part of
yeah.
their
So we do connect on certain levels, like we always did, and there is no age. Why we don't care about the age. Yet when we discuss about specific situations, they can, for example, they often relate to how they also, when they started a career, this or that happened, or they
life.
wanted to start a family, this or that happened, and that's where we see the gaps, kind of, because well, we are not in those same
In the same
moments in
age.
life.
Well, exactly. And I think also, well, the times have changed as well. I mean, yeah, me, I'm also in my 50s, so I can imagine that when I was 30, things were a lot different than they are today. So, yeah, even that, some of my advice might not be always be applicable to people your age at this moment because, well, just social media wasn't around when I was 30.
Yeah,
To name just one thing, my children can't imagine to work on a computer without internet because in their life there was always internet linked to a computer. Well, in their active life, because I think in the beginning of their lives that might not even always. Oh no, there was always internet. But yeah, for me that was different. So that's also a different part of things. So I can definitely see how that has influenced you in many different ways. Thanks for sharing these stories because it's wonderful. Let's move to that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what would have become of you?
um, I think so. When I finished high school, I really searched thoroughly what I wanted to do and what I wanted to study, and it ended up to two choices that I really saw as like really big different lives. I was really like playing my life here and investing in a specific path. So either it was economics and management, which is what I studied,
Hmm.
or I wanted to work and to study in hotel management. And I really hesitated a long time before making the decision, but I knew it would have had, most likely, but I had a lot of biases and assumptions, many impacts on my life. Just the fact that you then have to travel a lot, that you have to work during the weekend, that you have to work during the holidays, all that kind of stuff. That I was like, how am I going to do that? So, so I think that's what I would have been doing, because I really hesitated, but I thought, okay, let's. I also had discussions with my parents, of course, and came up the wise decision to say you can still do economics, and if you want to change, it would be easier. Again, assumptions, to then go back and try to work and study in hotel management, that to do it the other way around. So
Interesting.
I think that's what I would. Yeah.
Uh, uh, yeah, I so feel connected because my second son, 19 today. He well, not today, but he's 19 at this moment. Um, he studied hotel restaurant when he was when he was what is it, 15 till 18 or something like that, and he just started a business management last year. So very similar kind of choices, because indeed he was interested in both. And he yeah so very similar kind of decisions, hotel and hotel management. It still is interest to him, but then he thought, okay, business management is a little bit broader. I might still do that. I might do it for a hotel or for something else. We can see later on. And so yeah, it's interesting to see. For me, these two things felt not so much connected, and then I hear a very similar story with you. Like for you, they were also kind of connected. And listening to your story, it feels that right now you didn't moved on to hotel management, so you were happy with your choice. Is that the correct assumption?
It is. I also realized that, well, you start doing something and then it's not what you studied that will really written in stone,
Mm,
what you're going to do. And but I did honestly, when I had this big career shift, kind of from data analyst to scrum master, I did had that moment, when you question everything and when you think, oh, maybe I should do something completely different, and that at
mm.
that time crossed my mind. But I have no regrets until now, and I guess it's still, who knows what the future holds. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that's for me. It's one of the things that every time, because now I have two students, so both of them studying, and for especially the oldest one, it really felt like this is the most important decision in my life. Everything depends on it, and in one way, it's true. It is an important decision, but not everything depends on it. I mean, I see so many people who have doing something else than they have studied, or like you say, I start somewhere in a company and then my career shifts in another thing. Yeah, probably. Well, I don't know. When you studied, maybe the idea of Scrum Master existed already, but definitely not at university. So yeah, that's there was not that option, and then you work a couple of years, and all of a sudden you see that okay, that actually is things are changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so important information that most people at the age of somewhere between 18 and 22 don't realize. So whatever, and yes, it's an important choice because it will help you. It For me, it gives you some kind of ticket into the world of working. But that's just that. It's that entry ticket, and then later on you might move. And yeah, I'm convinced that in many companies, it doesn't matter what ticket you have. It matters that you do have a ticket. What kind of ticket is less important. Of course, for doctors and a couple of other things, it's very important that you do have the right ticket. Because I don't want to be operated by a person who's never studied anything that is related to that. But for many other things, I mean, yeah, there is. I assume that you do use some stuff that you've learned at school, but it's not. Yeah, I'm not going to say it's not important, but it's more important that you learned how to study, that you learned how to work and understand a little bit. In many ways, I think.
Yeah, my dad always told me it was about having a prepared, trained mindset and brain, and the rest you will learn on the job anyway. But it's true that when you have those studies, there are so many different options you can get and specialization. And then you end up with your diploma and you're like, okay, what am I going to do with it? And then I still remember how tough it is to say, okay, but what can I apply to? It's a difficult thing because it can be so
Mhm.
broad that's, well, maybe you will end up in a job that you weren't imagining and you still have the skills for it to start with, but yeah, you don't end up with a list of, okay, this is all the kinds of job I could apply to. So yeah, it's a
Exactly.
tough.
And did you, if you, because we talked about, okay, you could have become something like a hotel manager or something like that. Could you say some more about what attracted you to that life?
Yeah, so when I was younger, I always, of course, went on holiday with my parents. We would go just the three of us because my older sisters would often, well, they were already old enough to do their own holidays with friends or boyfriends. And we often went to smaller hotels. So not like the big chain, famous big building, more something had managed by a family. And I remember seeing the dynamic. You would have, I don't know, the father being in the kitchen preparing some meals, the children helping with preparing the tables, and the wife helping with setting up the rooms or giving suggestions about what to do in the area. And I always liked that more close, friendly approach of it, and kind of a personalized approach of it. And I thought, oh, I would love to be able to bring my own touch to that, to make sure that everyone can find their match. If some people want to be able to chill or to travel a lot or to discover some things around the area, I really like that approach of being able to personalize it. It's at least the romanticized version I had of it. Of course, I don't know if that's even how it works in real life, but I thought that would be awesome. And then you can discover new areas, because some children from friends of my parents did those studies, and then they went to Sweden, to the Netherlands, to the USA, you name it, to work for like 6 months, a year, etc. So they were able to also meet a lot of different people, discover cultures, and I thought, yeah, I found that all very exciting and yeah, very very interesting. And I thought, okay, maybe that's, and then you can bring your personal touch. At least that's how I saw it.
I can imagine, and indeed, well, it depends a little bit. If depending if you work in a small hotel or a real hotel chain, because then it's probably easier to go to other countries and other parts. But definitely the hospitality. You didn't use. I don't think you did use the word, but what you said about, okay, bringing that to people who are traveling, that's definitely something that is an important thing, that is yeah, that is nice to bring. I think that's really a nice thing. And I can imagine that yeah, it's for many people interesting to say, okay, we've all been, well, most of us, we've been to a hotel, so we understand a little bit what it is. At the same time, it's so interesting to see that even at the young age, while you need to decide to study, that you also thought, oh, this means weekend work, and that means, okay, that has an impact. Like if you want to have children and everything, like, okay, I have my sister-in-law they just sold a restaurant, and indeed they tried multiple times, can we shift it to work less in the weekend and more during the week? And every time they had to go back and say, well, no, our main income is during the weekend. Whatever we try to do, it's just our main source of income, so we can't just afford to say, let's not work in the weekend. And so they had to find ways to work with their children, yeah, during the weekend, and find ways how to raise them, and everything. So yeah, it's I find it interesting that even at a young age you were already thinking about, okay, weekend work, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's but yeah, but that's, at the same time, it's important, because if you think this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, it's good that to think about, what does that mean? Do I value that I have my weekend at the same time that other people have it? And well, especially for children, that's an important one, but also for other family members. If on friends, if everybody is free on the weekend and you're free on, I don't know, Monday and Tuesday, well, it's kind of hard to meet with people. And that's, yeah, that is also important.
Yeah, that was one of my biggest fear when I hesitated to go there, to study that. Now thinking back, I think back then I thought, okay, if I study that, I'm gonna do that as a job, and then I'm gonna do my best. I don't know, to have my own hotel. I don't know, and I got stuck into that, thinking, oh, if I do it, it means I sign with my blood. I'm gonna have to work on weekends nonstop for the rest of my life, which is completely untrue. I mean, I could have tried it and then do a couple of years and then say, okay, now
Exactly.
I want to do something else with my life, and that would have been totally okay and not
Mhm.
impossible to reach. But back then, those were my fears, and I did met people that were like, yeah, it's not written in stone, but to me it was. So that's why I didn't. But yeah.
But yeah, it's choices that we make on partial data that we think is full data, and that's that's
Yeah,
also part of life, I would say.
definitely.
I want to move to because that's a kind of a challenge that you saw. But what do you consider at this moment your biggest challenge, or at least the biggest challenge you want to share openly on the internet,
Yeah.
and why is that a good thing?
Um, I have something in mind. To be honest, I'm concerned that it will sound a bit obnoxious. It's a bit like when you have a job interview and you say, "Yeah, my biggest flaw is that I'm a perfectionist." So, a disclaimer here, but I do, and it's really at the moment. I'm a what if person, so I
Hmm.
overthink and I think, okay, what can be done differently? What if there is, well, there's always another perspective, but it's like, okay, what if maybe I'm not seeing the full picture here? So, in the context of being an agile expert, so Scrum Masters of with a role of agile coach, they are a lot of moments where it's a challenge for me when I'm trying to sometimes guide or coach or facilitate, you name the hat, but still having those inner voices thinking, okay, I'm not 100% sure.
Hmm.
What if this, what if that? But then it shifts a bit the balance in the exchange interactions you can have with the stakeholders. So that's a big challenge to go from the, I don't know, good is good enough and let's try it and we will see if it sticks or not. So that's definitely a big challenge, but I think it's
And
good for me.
if
Yeah.
it's before we jump in that second part, I think it might, I don't know, release some tension for you to hear that there is actually already a couple of people who shared something very similar here on the podcast. So I think yeah, many people in the well, many, yeah, I think even many people in the agile world, we do see options, we do see some of the things, and in a way, we're sometimes we're paid with the ID, or people pay us with ID. You will give us the best option. For me, that's shouldn't always be the case. It should be giving options and let other people make the choice. If you're in an agile coaching position, at least, and then being an overthinker and seeing other options when somebody says, hey, this, you being able to give three or four other ifs might also help them to say, oh, there is actually more than that. But anyway, I
Yeah, true.
interrupted you. For what you see is what is a good part of that. Maybe I already spoiled it. um,
No, to be honest, for me, the good part is that I I always have some sort of backup plan. So even like not really consciously, I do have some plan A, B, C. So I have my safety net. So I think it's a good
mm,
thing because now I try now to be like, okay, you know what? I'll go with the flow, and okay, we have this direction. Let's see what it gives, and try to lower the voices of what if this or that, and I'm detaching myself from the feeling of I know nothing or I'm not prepared at all, because I actually have always in the back of my head a couple of backup plans. So that's kind of creating a safety net for me, which can help me to overcome this approach of thinking always of all the different options and not going forward.
mhm. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Yeah, like I said, having multiple options, having thinking, I see as well. That yeah, I'm just, well, amazed is the wrong word, but it's interesting to see that many people in the agile space are overthinking, and like you say, it's good that good enough is sometimes important. And in a business content, sometimes people want to make everything perfect and then overthink it, and then they take 5 years to make a decision where maybe it's better to have a quick decision than just waiting for 5 years. Especially in, I heard yesterday in another interview that I did, there was a person that said, what did she say? She said that innovation in companies used to be 75 years, then it was 15 years, and now we're at the level that it's every 3 years big changes are already. So if you think for 5 years, well, you're already one iteration beyond too slow, I would say. Of course, 5 years I'm exaggerating, but yeah, I think we're living in a world where things can go fast. Usually overthinkers, I don't know, and that's more a question. Usually overthinkers are also fast thinkers. They're really good at thinking fast of options. Is that the case with you as well?
Yes, but I think putting them into execution is another thing. So I think there's maybe something else there that I don't dare to throw them out there. Where, like you said, it's actually a good approach to be like, okay, here are the other options at the top of my head, and throwing them out there because I have the options, and then I will like scan them for, you know, to make them perfect. I don't know, but
Hmm.
that's most likely what's missing is more the okay. Then I can throw them there, and we can see what we pick.
Exactly. That's yeah. Um, I think I understand that part as well. So so yeah, thank you for being that open. It's I think many people might recognize it, and in that way, I think it's also good to share these kind of things. Because it doesn't, for me, it doesn't mean that people who are working as an agile coach or a scrum master, that they're so much better and that they have none of the flaws or problems and all of us have and the challenges. And sometimes it's strange to see that, hey, it's perfectly okay to have a challenge like this. And it, I would say it might also help you to understand other overthinkers, and that you can ask them questions when this happens in a team. Is this something that has helped you already with when you're working with a person?
Not that much actually, and I have to say, it helps me. It's a bit reassuring to hear that feedback and that explanation from you because I didn't see it or feel it with peers. Like it seems like they figured it out a bit, or at least you really don't. Yeah, I don't notice that overthinking from my peers. And when we debrief about a session we had, this is not something that they seem to have faced. So for me, it was like more, oops, am I the only one? Um, so it's actually nice to hear that. Um, but other than that, no, I
Well,
didn't.
maybe
Yeah.
you're more open yet here in this conversation than some other people that you're talking about. I think that's another thing that a lot of agile coaches have, is that we're not always, but sometimes more open about the challenges that we face ourselves, and that helps us in many ways. And in that sense, other people that you're working with might not be yet at this kind of level. So that might be another kind of thing.
Yeah.
I hear a lot when I hear the stories that you're talking. I do hear some passion. I do hear some drive. So, and you already talked a little bit about it by being that youngest child. But do you know where that drive is coming from? Do you know what drives you?
I'm not sure to know where it's coming from, but I lately analyzed a bit what I was doing and what was bringing me that energy. And the whole part where you can, if you can, create the space for a group and really foster that, well, that's fancy word, but that's collective intelligence, and really foster that dynamic in a group is really something that drives me. So when I have the freedom of creating a session where I have, okay, an amount of time but still big enough to create a space and let the people build over the time their own session and what they need to co-create, is really the part where I just love how people, there is a whole dynamic, and then they just create something and build on upon each other. That's the best part for me of the job.
Hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that, especially, well, the example you gave about creating the space for people to do something. Um, yeah, it's I don't know how it feels to you, but I regularly, after such a session, I really feel, I don't know what it is, the gratitude or the people happy, like, okay, we had a problem and somehow you made room for us to think about, and okay, then we see that we actually had already the solution in us. Because as a facilitator, most of the time, that's what we do. We don't make the decisions, we don't do everything. We might influence it, but more in the sense that making sure that everybody has the space to talk and to think, I would say. And that sense, I can, yeah, I recognize that part when, yeah, I'm not working as an agile coach right now, but when I did have that thing, it's definitely when you facilitate, it's really nice to see the result of a group. And yeah, the more I do in the preparation, the less I have to do at the moment, but more making sure that people do have that guideline. So
Yeah. And something that you most likely covered a lot in your podcast, but one of my favorite part is the debrief.
mhm.
And I just now try to leave as much space as I can for that, because the group always come up with something new that I didn't think about. And then you can see how it really triggered to have more deepened conversation about something. I lately gave a workshop around serious games, and I just showed a couple of games. And there was one about the Moscow principle, what's a must have, could have, stuff like that. And they started debriefing also on taking a meta debrief of it, of how, what was their role into those discussions with their squads. And it really took another turn, but you could see that it's a discussion that that team never took the time to have, and there was an energy about it that was really, really powerful. So that's for me the best part, when you can have room for debrief and let them come and see what they take out of it.
Yeah, I really like that you stress that, because at agile conferences, for me, when you do a game, in many cases they well, default now at conference, they ask, okay, what will the participants learn? And I just hate that question, because for me it's like, that's what we'll discover together during the debrief. And I've done multiple games multiple times. Even as a participant, I've learned from the same game multiple things while doing it again and again. And I might think, oh, I've done this
Yeah.
already 4 or 5 times. I remember a version, something I've been giving myself for probably more than 5 years. And at some point, we do it and we have not enough participants. So I say to my co-facilitator, you know what? I'll just join and play the game. And I'll play it with every knowledge I have. Just jumping into that, I make again mistakes that I should know better, or I make new mistakes and I learn something new. And it's not predictable what people can learn. Well, at least not for me. And that debrief is in that sense so important. Yeah, I really like that you emphasize that topic. That's the word I was looking for. So really wonderful. Thank you for doing that.
My pleasure.
Let's move to that next thing. What do you consider at this moment your biggest achievement? And what I've noticed when I ask this question, basically, this is your moment to brag. This is your moment to be really proud. And is it easy for you, Samantha, to be proud and to brag about something before we
Take a
jump into the
guess.
real answer?
No,
I don't
no.
know. I've had so many different kind of answers, so no, it's not
No.
easy. And still, this is the opportunity. This is the moment that you can be proud of something. What is something what you consider your biggest achievement?
I think where I can try to find accomplishments and be proud of myself is when I can put things back in perspective and in evolution. And where I work, so it's at Proximus, we put in place in the Agile community an internal conference. So it's a day for all the agilists at Proximus, and you would have some speakers that we, of course, find internally as much as possible, some workshops, etc. And when I joined as a Scrum Master, they were starting this new event that was 2 years ago, and I joined the organization just to help. I just arrived in my role, but I was like, okay, let's just see what it is about. I can meet with people. Let's go for it. And I saw a colleague give a workshop, and I helped him more in the practicalities because I didn't know much at that time. And I thought to myself, that would be nice if we had to do this event again, to also participate and maybe give a workshop.
Hmm.
And then the year went by, and I joined the organization again, and some topics popped up. We made the audience vote, and one of the topics that people wanted to discover was serious games. And since I'm a lot into board games, and I have some workshops on that and conferences, I thought, okay, I give it a try. And I ended up having to give a workshop in the morning and in the afternoon because a lot of people wanted to join. So even if those were peers, there were a lot of people I never really met before. It was also trying something. I'm not an expert in serious games, and I tried out a couple of things. I had to design the workshop myself from A to Z. So it was really like my very first project, from A to Z, basically. So I think that's something. Looking back, I was like, okay, I looked at it. I was like, maybe someday, and then the year after, I was like doing
So
it. So
So, did I hear correctly that because you said in the beginning that you're very into serious games and all these kind of things, but did I hear it correctly that you discovered that part because you were forced or you were asked to give that kind of session? Should I see it like that? Because board games is one way, and but serious games is still something else. But you took that challenge because you thought, "Oh, games, I know something about it." Is that how I should? Hear what happened, or was it more different?
it's a bit more balanced in the sense that I discovered the topic of serious games at the XP days. So I saw
Hmm.
a bit how it worked, and I had some introduction on the concept. And then I started to read books about it. But, when you have books you like, and then you read a chapter, and then you put it back on your shelf. So indeed, it was a balance of I had some basis, some introduction. I was interested, and then we had an early brainstorm with the whole audience, and that was just one of the many, many topics. And then it was
Right.
chosen. I was like, yeah, okay, I know I'm the one who suggested it because I know the basics and I will learn more. So it was really an entrance to say, okay, let's
Wow.
go, and then think of, okay, what other games do I have that I could maybe tweak, and so it went that way.
Wow. I really like that story because and indeed it's achievement. It's something to be proud of. Um, just from going to yeah to an internal conference saying, hey, I want to participate, and then the next time doing something as the main speaker about a topic that you're still discovering. But for me, that's also I think one of the best ways to learn. And when I learn about the topic, when I talk about it, I learn even more. And that yeah, that's is a good way, and it helps indeed achieving much more. And what was the feedback on from that session?
It was really, really good. So to that, I have the imposter syndrome, thinking those were all my peers. Of course, they're very supportive. It's the internal community, but they were really good. For a lot of people, it was something new. They also liked how I facilitated it. I learned a lot from Charlie, to adapt on the spot. So I had my storyline, but then I really learned to also, well, go with the flow, see what the group is doing, and then go along with that, leaving a lot of room for debrief. And they really loved that. So that was for I would say 90% of the audience something new, that they discovered, and they really liked the approach. Not many of them said, okay, I will dare to bring it to a squad, because then there is like, do we have time for a game, and all this kind of discussions. But they really liked the approach to have something that seemed lighter during a day of workshops, conference internally, because you have a lot of different workshops that are more, how to slice the value, how to use a certain tool to manage the backlog, etc., which is interesting, but really work. And then you have a topic that is more, okay, game, we can have a laugh, even if we learn something around agile with it. So they really loved it. It was really positive. I still now I already did one in one division. I have other requests to come in the homecoming day. So when they meet up with their
Hmm.
peers to give that workshop again to other people. So they were happy.
That's really wonderful to hear. But it's also nice to hear how inside your company people are making rooms for these kind of internal learnings. I do know the company a bit, but I've never participated. And I do know some of the people who've worked and who've coached there, but I've never was part of it. But I now do understand a little bit better because indeed, yeah, that is part of how you change your culture, making sure that we also learn internally, not just purely externally. Because then it's, and like you said some time ago, you said like we try to bring as many people as possible from internal, because then it's not just, oh, this is some external speaker that is very smart and whatever, and say something about that people will never believe because of the, yeah, it's somewhere else. No, no, this is people internally. That's what we do.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's exactly that. And something I didn't mention in the intro, it's been a couple of months that I also am the community manager of the agile community, and that's indeed something that we try to put more there. So we have moments every other month where we meet up as the whole community and to really enhance that learning, because often people go on in their routine, which is totally normal. But then that's really a challenge too, to reactivate that learning from the peers. And that comes from within, because we all read books, we all have concrete cases from our squads, we all go to conferences or listen to podcasts, and the point is to make it live, and also to have, you mentioned it a bit, that safe space where you can try out as well. We try to motivate people to say if there's a workshop or something you want to try out, before doing it with the squad, you can try it out with us, and we're like your guinea pigs.
mhm. Exactly. That's really nice. Thanks for sharing this and sharing this internal view on this larger corporation. Okay, let's move to that next question. Um, do you have a personal agility tip to share?
I have one that most likely will sound obvious. But I lately, in latest missions internally, I really realized that, concretely, it's for me, go back to the people's context. I've started very, a lot of dreams, very excited about agility. I had the Scrum Guide in mind, and we have all those big recipes, and when we see things, we often spot problems and challenge before the people themselves, and then we take the bazooka, like one of my colleagues would say, and we just give them all the whole big recipe. And lately, I realized how important it is to also just come back where they are and what they perceive as a problem or not, and start from there, and not throw away a ceremony or a technique or two, and just start with basic words, and basic approaches to, okay, how can we help unblock the situation, but without going with the big things that we know, that we classically would put in place.
Yeah, kind of like that as a way to look at things. Um, and if you think about that, maybe to dive a little bit deeper, how did you discover this, and how did you, yeah, learn this and apply that then?
So basically, I started as a Scrum Master, allocated to one, then two squads. So, we arrive, they have to have their ceremonies, and then you really apply it in a robotic way. Dynamic and projects were complicated to a point that I had the chance to have a very open-minded boss, and we discussed, okay, where else in the company can I bring my help? And I arrived in a team of agile coaches where it's more mission-based, depending on different teams within the company that have certain issues. And we had a domain manager that came to us with problematic. So he had two teams. working more in cloud network projects. And so basically, those teams would participate in a lot of projects from other teams. But when there were those quarterly plans, they were often or forgotten or really late put into the discussion. So they would get those last minute requests that were really urgent, and they were a bit like jumping in the train a bit too late.
Hmm.
But aside from that, they also had issues. So two teams working together, but not syncing a lot, etc. So one approach could have been, okay, we need to improve their collaboration, then maybe need some more recurrent syncs, stuff like that. But what was the pain issue for them, that they could really feel the impact, was to be missed in those things within the company. So the first thing we approached with them was around the governance of the project and around those specific moments where different divisions would meet on a quarterly base to align on the projects. But a classic approach when I thought was like, oh yeah, but we see that's because also they don't communicate that much, and then you have all those ideas of different ceremonies or techniques they could do, but that's bringing the bazooka for a lot of issues that they don't completely sense yet.
Hmm.
Whereas the transparency and the governance around the projects was something they were like, it was obvious for them that's an issue, and we really don't know how to pick that up. And that's where we started. And what was magical is that we started that, and then we had some sessions to the, okay, how did it go? Quick on the spot retrospective without naming it. And they were like, yeah, what we're missing is that now we would like to also, we have all the stakeholders, and it would be nice if you could showcase them a bit where we are with the project and how it's going on, what it looks like. So by themselves, they would bring techniques or moments that we could have suggested. So for me, it was really a shift of start from the root cause and what they can really feel as a pain, and the rest will most likely follow.
Yeah, and if it doesn't follow, it means that yeah, that they're not ready for it. Because if you would have brought it and they were not ready for it, then yeah, that would not have helped. Yeah, that's definitely something to yeah, that is really important to think about. And I think that's what many well, when you start out as a coach, that you don't always realize. Because link it back to what you said earlier on, sometimes we think that we have to come up with all the options, and if you're an overthinker, you have lots of these options, but that doesn't help. And sometimes it's good to indeed to take a step back and let them come with the options, and let them then discover. And yeah, I'm assuming that you, especially as an overthinker, you already thought about that option, but it doesn't help. And yeah, it's sometimes, well, it ego might play. Then you say, well, I already thought about it, but that, okay, that's not important. It might make, well, as a facilitator, it might mean that we might step in and say, hey, that's a good idea. That might be dangerous as well, because we might think it's a good idea because we thought about it as well. But the most important thing is it's their idea, and they want to go forward with that.
Yeah,
So
and I think another thing that was challenging when you have that is that you see that they're gonna hit the wall is really extreme, but you see that they're gonna stumble, and you see some issues, you're like, that could have been avoided. But at the same time, if you don't let the people also you know hit some obstacles, then they won't realize the need behind. So I think that was also difficult, because I had ideas of solutions, or yeah, ways to put things in place to make it better or easier. But then it was like, okay, let's let them make their own experience and then see what pops out. But that's also difficult, of course.
yeah, that's indeed, it's again allowing the team to come up with the ideas, and toning down our own ego, and toning down our own options. Well, for me, to go back to the fact that you said you have multiple options, I noticed that the more options I have, the easier it is for me to let go, because I'm like, okay, they can come up with options, and if it doesn't work out, I can still blurt something out if they really want me. But in general, that doesn't help. They should really come up with the ideas, and yeah, that's the best solution. let's move to that next question. What have you learned about remote working? Because I think if you're kind of a couple of years in that Scrum Master role, did you move to that role somewhere in the middle of COVID, or was that around that time, or how was that?
No, that was after. So when I arrived, there were a lot of discussions. Oh, it was better before, and all that kind of stuff. So I arrived. I arrived after. So the aftermath of not having the boards on the wall anymore, or having struggles with camera on or not. Uh, for me, it was from the start. So that's not something that I
Mhm.
experienced. But it's a really interesting topic because it's such a good topic for debates. I had it not later than yesterday during a training and discussions around leadership, and it popped up because it really divides people, remote working.
Mhm.
So yeah, fine. I'll
And
let
so,
you
do
ask
you have?
questions, but
No, no, but that's that for me. This is why it's not just a tip, but the sentence I'll bring it up again is what have you learned about remote working? So, and I like you said, it's a lot of debate. Some people hate it, some people love it, some people have some mixed feelings about it. So, like you say, the world is different than it was before, and a world that you might not have known as a Scrum Master. But what I assume now that you have a team that is partially remote at least, or sometimes. So I don't know. Or you also worked remotely during COVID at least, I think, even if it's a different kind of role. So what have you learned in the last years about remote work?
huh. I've learned different things. I think the whole balance between work life and personal life is definitely an interesting one because I saw, and me myself included, different dynamics popping up of
Hmm.
and more balance. As we had the discussion yesterday, as long as the work is done, how can you argue that someone will start at 9 or at 10 or if and for me that was interesting to see that shift of okay, people can maybe me, or at least that was my vision and how I lived it, more ownership of how am I going to balance my work life and my personal life, and to make it easier because then you can adapt. For me, for example, there are moments where I'm more productive for certain tasks, and I can then arrange my calendar around that, or specific sessions that you want to have or more impactful on site, and then you get time to prepare it so that everyone is committed to travel there. So for me it was really a shift of the way we now work, and that's for what I said it's a debate because I realized that for some people we are still in this aftermath of COVID, and there is still that discussion of we'll go back to the normal. But
Hmm.
aren't we in the new normal? So for me, it's more learning that this is most likely a new normal, and that's a new dynamic that is interesting to take into account because people have maybe more freedom or more space to adapt a bit the way they work to what suits them best as well.
Yeah, I think, well, when there is change, people there is always people who prefer the new way of working and always people who prefer the old way of working. And so yeah, definitely, well, let's face it, it was not a gentle way how we were pushed into the remote working because there was a decision that was pushed on us by a government or by a virus, because it's not the government just saved us for or tried to save us from the virus in a way. So yeah, that is something that people didn't like, and then they all blame it on whatever. But yeah, like you say, a lot of us, we learn to work in a different way. Some appreciate what you just talked about. How would I say it? What did you say? The work life balance, that it's a
Yeah.
different kind of thing. So definitely there is, yeah, there is good things about it, but it's, yeah, it was not like it was before. And so you talked that you had some discussions about it yesterday. Without going too much into details about your company or what these people were saying, could you state some of the kind of opinions that people have, where people feel in one direction or the other? without
Well,
disclosing, of course, the
yeah.
people.
But to be honest, that's also a discussion I had with some people that are not related to where I work, and that they
Work.
also had those discussions in their workplace. There is a whole discussion on the fact that people have now other, how do you say, schedules, and that they will tell you, I cannot come on that day because I have to pick up my kid at 4, or because I have this dance lesson at 4. And now you have a whole discussion around the, yeah, but how would you do, where were you doing it before COVID? Then that's not fair. So you have a lot of discussions on, we are paid to work and we have those work hours, and that should be respected whether or not you want to work from home. So that was one big thing. And then you have also a lot of struggles with the camera on, camera off.
Hmm.
And to be honest, then here I will jump back on the question you asked, because so I indeed, when COVID arrived, I was working in another team with another job. And for example, there, before COVID, we were seeing ourselves, we were on site together, but we had little interactions because of the dynamic and the type of work we were doing.
Hmm.
Whereas while still working from home as a Scrum Master, I would have more meaningful conversation and discussions and sessions with people, even if it was online. So for me, it was a learning that it's not per se because you see each other on site that you can have that connection, and those meaningful conversation. But that's where it divides, where people say, okay, but we have to see each other on site in order to really connect with people. So that was also a discussion.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because, like you say, especially in the company that you are, that's a very large company with, well, last time I passed by, two large buildings with, I don't know, a couple of thousand people in it. You might actually collaborate with someone who's in the other building. Um, and so you might not meet them all the time, of course, in the team yourself, but I can imagine that some teams collaborate together that you might not, yeah, always see that person. So remote or physically, that might not make much a difference. I don't know. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think it's fun. Now we did move out, so we have a smaller building, so we get to bump into each other more, and still, because we don't come the same days at the office, so it depends. But it's
Hmm.
true. There were times, I remember, even before COVID, we would have calls because we were actually so sitting far away from each other, and we had meetings before and after that. I had people like that. Sometimes I encountered them at the coffee machine weeks after having a meeting with them, and we're like, we already saw each other somewhere, and that was the first time we met. So that's indeed, yeah, that's indeed, yeah.
Yeah, it's it's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story about how that indeed sometimes is different. Um, and I recognize some of the things that you talk about, the whole discussions, camera on, camera off. Um, for me, it depends really on the kind of things. This is a personal conversation. If you would do that and you would not turn your camera on, that would be very strange. I did a job interview with someone last year that didn't turn on his camera, and I was like, that's probably not going to work out because we are a full remote company and we do want you to, well, interact with people. Um, if of course it's an all hands meeting with 100 people, I personally don't care if people put on their cameras because most of the time you won't even see most of the people. If you speak up in that one in that meeting, if you're one of the speakers, of course I do hope you will turn on your camera, and that's very logical. Also, if you want to ask a question to the speakers, I assume the same thing. But if you're just there listening for half an hour, yeah, I personally don't care much. That is different. But if you're in an interactive meeting, a workshop, or whatever, that's definitely, then I prefer to see and see the interactions.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think a big discussions that we had with many colleagues already is also, you can express your need of having the camera on, right? If you
mhm.
want to be able to see the body language, etc. But it's also interesting to be genuinely curious of, okay, what makes it that the camera is off?
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
there something that we don't know about that you're not comfortable with, or to really have that moment to see, okay, in which extent the need of the other person might need to be more respected than the fact of seeing them. I don't know if you see what I mean, but it was a
Yeah,
whole
but
discussion about
yeah,
that.
exactly. For me, the discussion, I prefer that people turn it on, but there might be a lot of reasons, especially during COVID. I've worked with people that said, "Well, I'm in a house where I'm not supposed to work, and now we're like three, four people all in the same room, all with our headsets on. Putting on cameras will look very weird because we're all sitting and we don't have um, a desk or something like that. So, yeah, I know also about children who were in the class of one of my children, where the teacher, when we had a conversation with the teacher, they said, "Yeah, we know that there are people who have in their living conditions." They might not even have a computer at home, let alone a camera and internet. And how do we deal with these kind of things? So,
Yeah,
yeah, so I know that the some schools in Ghent gave out, or Ghent at least gave out a lot of computers that were normally used to rent out for certain things. They all used that to give to people who didn't have a computer, and they gave options to solve these kind of problems. And of course, if you then have a very shady internet connection, then that's not easy to turn on your camera and everything. So it's indeed not a simple black and white
yeah,
thing. But yeah, it's indeed discussions with the team. Why do you prefer it? And I've seen also in one of the teams I'm working with, I've seen a person making really in the team a little statement like, "Hey, I've never met you people. I really want to see you. Could you turn on the cameras?" And since that person left, I see a decrease in number of people who are turning on their cameras because they're like, "Oh, he left, so why would we turn on our cameras?" Well, maybe for the other people, but it's a discussion, and it's, yeah, I think it ebbs and flows a little bit on these
yeah,
kind of things. So Brent, thanks for bringing that on. It's really, yeah, I think it is important to keep it as you said, as a discussion point, or as something to talk about. Let's move to that next question. What is a book that you have read that you want to talk about?
So I suggested a book. It's interesting because one of the reason I postponed our call was that I was thinking of the perfect book to bring, and I was like, I have to find a
Oh,
book around agility, and but I couldn't find something that was like, yeah, really resonating and that we could discuss. And then came the idea to say, okay, can we think out of the box and bring something that is not agile related? So the book that I wanted to bring on the table is called, I don't know how if it exists in English. I suppose it does. That's Guide du Burnout.
so I only looked up the French
Yeah,
version. Indeed, I didn't look it up in English. But it's when I was trying to bring it on screen, I was thinking, oh, I should probably have looked and checked if it does have an English version. But let's explain a little bit why that is an important book for people to read.
yeah. So for the little story, that's a book I received. I started working in 2018, and
Hmm.
one of my sister in her company, the author, came to present her book and to sign it, and people who wanted to buy it could have an edition. And she bought it for me to be like, okay, I see you're committed at work. Maybe you should read it to be careful. You know, you're still young. You just started, so have your proper limits. And that book ended up on my shelf, and I only read it
As it
thoroughly.
happens with
Yeah, as it
books that are
happens.
important.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. You know, some people say when it's not resonating, at some point in your life you will pick it up and you will read it.
Hmm.
And I read it well about 4 years later in 2022 because I went to a period where, well, I had a burnout. I was really really in a lot of question about what I was doing, what's going on, etc. And I guess to make it short, I think if you are overwhelmed and you feel like maybe I'm getting there or I know someone is getting there, it is a great book because it's very concise. It's written in such a way that you have very short chapters. And she also wrote it for people who were in burnout, meaning you have less attention, you have less energy for everything. So it's more about what is the chapter that I need info on, and then can jump in there. You have some summary, some tips and tricks. So it's really written in a very kind, approachable way. And there's a specific section that always sticks with me. But again, maybe it's very obvious, but for me it wasn't. It's all about visualizing the energy you have. And she
Mm,
explained the theory of the little spoons. I didn't know about it.
yes,
You know about it? Okay.
I know this spoon theory. Yes.
Okay. I didn't. And I found it very interesting how it helps in a simple way to visualize what is the energy I have and what are the different activities costing me in terms of energy, to really for yourself and for others be able to conceptualize the level of energy you have. So that was for me very powerful. I still use it now. And then it becomes a bit of an inside joke, whether you read the book or not, to be like, oh, that must have cost you a lot of little spoon, or just checking like, how do you have a lot of enough little spoons for that today? Sounds a bit childish, but I can assure you that when you're in that space, or when you see people being in that space, it's really a little tool that helps. So for me, that was like the key takeaway to take from the
Yeah,
book, definitely.
I will link the story of the spoons, where the way it's written out by the original author, because she used it as a way to explain to a friend about the disease she had and how it helped her, because she couldn't really explain. And yeah, by coincidence, she was in a restaurant, and she just grabbed a couple of spoons from the table behind her, just as to explain, okay, that's the kind of energy I have. And oh, let's go to your day. Well, that's cost you this. And so at the end of the day, or half through your day, you don't have any spoons left anymore. So basically, you're out of energy. And it was created indeed to explain for somebody who has, lupus, I think,
Yeah.
if I remember
Mhm.
correctly. But it is indeed a story I've heard and I explained already multiple times. For people with burnout, it's very logical, because it's a different kind of disease, but the reaction or the results is the same, like lack of energy. And I think that's yeah, yeah, it's once you know the story, you immediately understand it, what that means. And it helps to explain it to all kind of people. You don't have to be, I don't know, a doctor or whatever. You can explain it even to young children. So yeah, that's a different kind of way of explaining things that is very clear. Meanwhile, I did look it up. I don't think that this book exists indeed in
Ah,
English.
shoot.
So it's just for the French people. But I do think the general message that I'm hearing is that, yeah, it is important, especially if you are in a burnout, to read a kind of book that kind of explains these kind of things, but also in a way that is digestible. Because indeed, I've read I've never been into burnout, but I've coached some people who were either close to burnout or who were recovering from burnout. And yeah, the fact that I can read some of these books were rather difficult to read in that sense. I agree. And that's probably not the thing that you want to do at the moment that you're close to a burnout or recovering or inside a burnout and whatever. That's yeah, then you literally don't have energy for anything, let alone reading large books. So I think that's a good thing. So I do hope that yeah, Miss Evrard will translate it or have it translated into English, because that might be an important thing to have for more people. Um, I don't know about, well, I haven't definitely not read an easy, comprehensible book around it. There's a
Yeah.
lot of things there, but that's a good thing.
And you know,
And
that's the danger, huh? That's when you want to conceptualize as much as you can and understand, and then it becomes very, very mental exercise, which is definitely not the place you're in. So that's definitely not don't buy a book that is explaining really in scientific ways what burnout is, because it's going to be even more overwhelming, for sure.
That's the thing. That's yeah, it's and for me, the in a way, I think agile is a dangerous thing in the sense that the people who love agile the most are the people who also use agile, or what I see is, oh, I can deliver every 2 weeks and I can deliver in short iterations. But if you then want to do too much, and then you keep doing it, and yeah, in a larger project, what you typically have is that people do a lot in the beginning of a project, then it goes down a little bit, and then it goes up near the end. But then you're recovering for with the next project. But if you're in a 2 week cycle, you still have that, but it's your down goes a lot less, and your high is actually very high. And if you want to deliver good, and you want, yeah, you're perfectionist or whatever, you deliver even more. And there is a very big risk, or I think there is a very big risk for agilists to yeah, to go for burnout. And I actually seen quite a couple of agilists who did have a burnout. So yeah, it's even more important to think about that at that kind of level with people. And I don't think we always realize that enough, I would say. um, and so learning, and especially in our fast pacing in industry, that's happening even more, I would say.
Yeah.
So
And
thank you for bringing
yeah.
that book. And so, but in a way, maybe your sister recognized that you were at risk, or did you talk about that, why she gave you the book? Or is just that, oh, we know that this is happening a lot in the industry, let's give you something? Or how was that?
um I think, well, I don't know what were the ins and outs about the author coming and explaining it, but it definitely had an impact, and most likely on, okay, this is something happening more and more. But I know that she saw how committed that I was when I started working. Work has always been for me a very important pillar in my life. That's where I
Mhm.
thrive. I can express myself. I really, really like that area of my life. And I think she saw that, and she wanted to like give signs of, okay, be careful of the importance you're giving it and the space you're giving it,
Right.
because the burning of the energy is something that I was really not aware of. And that even now helps me with colleagues or with squads, that you can have, you don't judge, or you don't for me it's more an indicator of, be like, okay, what's the energy for me, but also that others have. But that's a whole concept that I wasn't aware of. And that took me a long time. We have an extra guest here. That took me a long time to uh, to understand, and I think she saw it right away. So
Yeah, and I think, well, and so when you then went into the burnout, did you remember that book, or did your sister had to remember you that I gave you that book? Or how, I'm just interested in the dynamic. At what point did you then realize, hey, I have a book about that?
no, I remembered I had the book, because I think over time I was often like seeing it in the corner of an eye. I'm like, yeah, do I read it or not? And it actually took me a couple of months in being in a burnout to, you have that moment where you start accepting and or realizing where you are and what's happening. And that's where I really was ready to open the book. So I was aware it was there, not ready to read it. And then I started realize, okay, now I am not in denial anymore. I realize where I'm at, and I'm ready to see what it's all about.
Yeah, I can definitely. Well, this is the two parts. You need to have the energy for reading, like you said earlier on, but at the same time, you indeed, like you say, you have to accept that you are there. And with many of these things, the acceptance is sometimes part of the solution. By the time we're ready to accept, yeah, the solution is almost there, I would say. Not fully, because there is more than that, but yeah, I can definitely see that we need to be ready to accept it before anything will happen, I think.
And another thing I didn't mention that also attracted me, if I can say it that way, to read the book, is that there are a lot of testimonials as well. And You
Mm.
feel a bit alone in what's happening to you. You know it happens to people, but it's like a bit or taboo, or it's not something really out there, at least not for me. So it also really helps to then have like real examples of different people being in burnout, and we all have, well, different ways it happened, different areas it happened, and that also helped feeling less alone while healing, while being on your healing journey.
I can definitely recognize that. That's something that I've heard many people talk about. That it's talking to, yeah, people who are been in the same space, and it doesn't matter if it's burnout or something else. If you can talk to other people who have similar kind of experiences, that really helps to accept, like, okay, I'm not a failure. It's more because in burnout for me is, it is partially the, it's not the laziness, let's make that clear. It's really the people who are most driven that have most risk, but also who are in an environment that doesn't allow them to change a lot about what's happening to them. And then they feel sometimes like, hey, is it my fault? And sometimes I have the feeling that we live in a society that wants to blame people, and not just for burnout, but for all kind of things that are happening to us. And it's like, well, let's not forget that we just been through a pandemic, that we've well, I'm working with people who are in Ukraine, so they're literally in a war for 10 years. So for them, they're in the trauma on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, it's very logical that not everybody is reacting the way they would react if they would just be not in these kind of situations. And I've seen many people, the interesting about Corona, what I always say is that I've seen people who've been crashing at the beginning of Corona, like not accepting that situation. And then I saw a lot of people, and I think a lot of our agilists also like surviving that first part, because we know how to deal with change. And then when things are over, it's like, or but mostly over, because we can still discuss if Corona is still over, because there are still more people getting it, but still it's less dangerous today. What I see is that when the world is safer or feels safer, then people crash. It's like, okay, now my body tells me it feels like this is the moment I can crash, and people don't expect it anymore. I don't know if that was same case with you, or is your similar kind of situations around you.
Um, I can relate to it. I really, of course, thought about it a lot, about how it happened, etc. And I think there was indeed that concept of you power through, you power through, you power through, and then there is a calmer period and you collapse. One big learning for me, and that might be controversial, is also the fact that we are also in part responsible of the situation we're in. And well, there are different contexts, I know, but for example, for me, there was also this awareness of, okay, what did I do with the different pillars in my life? And it's not
Hmm.
always about just because I work too much. There are other things. There are other things that you don't prioritize, or where you don't put your limits the proper way. And through the work I did around that, I discovered the fact that that there's the weight you put to some pillars and the balance that you forget to put. And that's also, well, you don't do it to to mess up with yourself, but there are
So
patterns that
happens
you do that are actually part of the reason why you collapse.
things
And
are
that's
happening,
very
right?
how do you say,
Confronting.
confronting. Well, exactly.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. That is, yeah. Well, it's, yeah, I'm not sure if it's really like a mistake or whatever, but it's, yeah, in there is always choices that we make, and these choices have impacts. And sometimes it's about, okay, we let someone control us, or we let us get away in a certain situation. um, and but it's dangerous if other people start to use it in a way to say, like, okay, this is your fault, because that's something I personally don't like. But that doesn't mean that it's not because it's that or not that, yeah, there is no way you could have influenced it.
Yeah.
But it could have then be, yeah, how would I say it, happening at a different pace, or somewhere else. That's yeah.
I would maybe rephrase it in the epiphany for me was okay, there are things happening out of my control zone, but there's also things that I can put in place to re-put a good balance in my life. So it's more the
Mm.
fact that you can take back certain ownership to bounce back at a certain pace. Whereas, because all of this didn't happen for nothing, when I started to work in 2018, a couple of months after, I already felt that was for me the premises of the burnout, and that was 4 years before that. So there's also this realization that okay, there is a part that I can play to have a proper balance and to, yeah, I want to say to be healthier, but that's very that's not the right word, but
Yeah,
anyway.
but well, in an environment that allows you indeed to be.
Exactly what I meant to say is that my first job, there were difficulties there, and I didn't work that much on what I was feeling and the issues I had personally, because I thought okay, that's because the environment is like this. And then the thing that is beautiful about life is that it's going to put you back in other scenarios where you're going to have similarities, because that's you learn from those patterns. So basic example, if you don't know how to say no, you're going to end up again in situations where, well, you're going to feel frustrated again, and difficult things are going to
Oh
happen
yeah,
because you didn't learn how to say no. So that's a bit what I meant.
yeah, it's one of the things I've done already multiple times in presentations, and for me, one of the largest ones I do remember. Which I just talked about Ukraine. I've been into conference in Kiev, and that was a kind of theater room setting. So I don't know, a couple of hundred people, and in the middle of my presentation, I asked people to say no and to really stand up or first say no, and it's like no, but you don't you hardly hear it. And so I then ask people to stand up and really shout no, and really do it a couple of times. And I do remember one product owner coming up to me afterwards and said, if I probably said more no today in your presentation than I did in the last year or maybe the last 5 years. And I was like, and yeah, he was shocked himself that he realized that, wow, okay. And for me, a product owner, it's a big part is saying no to customers. Okay, you don't have to say it with no, you might say it in a different way, but in the end result is like, at this moment what you're asking me is not a priority for the team. Other things are a higher priority, so you should feel comfortable saying no in what way or another. And if you're not comfortable as a product owner, that will give you a lot of stress. And that's a little bit, and that's why I do this exercise regularly when I do talks. When and it's easier to. I once tried it in a very small setting with a team with just 5 to 10 people, and it felt really awkward. People didn't like it, but if you do it with a lot of drama in a large setting with a couple of hundred people, it's really nice, and people feel a little bit awkward as well in the beginning. But once they see, like, I don't know, 50 people shouting, then they dare to do it. And by the end, basically, you have everybody shouting really loud. And it really is a big power to learn, like, hey, I'm allowed to do this. And this, okay, it's a joke, but at the same time, it's seriously, how easy is it to you to say no?
Yeah,
And yeah, well I've coached a lot of what I would call pleasers, people who feel that they have to say yes for everything, and they forget about their own body, they forget about their own spoons, the energy that they have left. And so then it's really good to learn, like, hey, I'm allowed to do that. And not just for personal reasons, also because, of course, the moment you go into a burnout, it's not good for you, but it's also not good for the company, because you're out for an undefined time. They don't know when you're coming back. And if you're much better at regulating your own energy, you will be able to continue working at a different rate than before, because you're not overburning yourself. But that's actually a good thing.
yeah,
And in many cases, and I don't know, some people are good before burnout to even still deliver good high quality, but most people in the months before really deliver lower quality also. And yeah, and because of that they work even harder, and that actually is a negative spiral, I
yeah.
would say.
exactly.
Wonderful story for a small little book. So thank you for sharing all of that. It's and I think yeah, this is a topic that's very dear to me. So I really want to yeah, I think it's a really important one. So I want to go to that. For me, one of the most important questions. What question do you think I should also ask you, and what is the answer?
That's a very, very tough question.
Hmm. Why? Do you know
I
why?
came
It's
up with one.
okay.
Yeah. Um, Also, because I'm curious to see what you would answer,
Hmm.
because you have another expertise, of course. But lately, I've been asking myself that, and I have a draft of an answer.
Hmm.
So I was wondering how one could manage the tension between the the client's needs and requirements and your own core values. So,
Say
you
more.
know, even even because I'm not a freelance, I'm not consultant. So even internally, you also have clients, you also have stakeholders, and there are those moments where, well, you have your role, and there is what is explicitly expected of you, and then what implicitly is expected of you, and then there is what matches your core values or not.
Hmm.
So, for example, you would have a wish from stakeholders that they have specific sessions where they have to come up with an action plan, or I name it, and they have specific objectives for their session. But then during the session, you would see specific interactions or conflicts or doubts that would actually deserve attention, and the action plan is like a next step. So there is the, okay, what I am asked for with my role and what I'm paid to do in a sense, and the needs of the client. And then there's also me as an agilist with my perceptions of things as well, or sometimes also my talents, what I think would be best. And yeah, that's something that I wonder how to balance that.
That is a hard question, I think, yeah? And I think there is no perfect answer to these kind of things, if you ask me, because it's um, for me a lot depends on how hard the values are challenged. Yeah? I can give an example. In the past, I was asked by I'm trying to state the situation without going too much into details because I would don't want well, I don't want it to be clear what person I'm talking about. But I was asked in the past, long time ago, by a boss to lie to my customers or to his customers, and so I refused to do that. And so yeah, it was for me a big balance, like finding what is possible. I knew he was lying to the customers, and at 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 a level that yeah, I wanted to give more details, but then it would be clear for what it is. But basically, he was selling two kind of products to customers for different prices, but they were delivered as it's the same thing, because that's yeah, that otherwise they would not have been able to sell to either one. So there was a way, it was a win-win for everybody, because everybody could get their product, and it was adapted, and they felt it was different, but still I felt that it was at least borderline unethical. He disagreed with me, but that's part of it. Um, but I definitely said, like, okay, because it's borderline, I'm not going to go against, and I'm not going to tell your customers like, hey, you're lying. Um, at the same time, I'm not going to jump into that, and I'm not going to join yeah, that part of the conversation. Yeah, so in that sense, for me it was like finding that balance, like where are my values and what are yours. And so lying to customers for me was a hard limit. There were other things that he did that I also thought, okay, my values might a little bit different, but I'm okay with it. I can, yeah, I well, for that person, I was not in contact. Like I was like probably 1 hour a week in contact with my boss. The rest of the time, I could mostly do my work the way I wanted to do it, and the customers were happy. So yeah, I didn't feel that there was a big problem there. And so yeah, that's why for me it felt like, okay, if some of the other things that feel different, I'm okay with that, right?
Yeah.
But that's it was yeah, it was looking around like what works for me within these values. And I think, yeah, if it's really hard values that are really like, okay, this is completely different for me, then I would not do that. That's a little bit how it felt to me. um, I don't know if that's an answer to your version of that question.
That is indeed an answer. Yeah. Yeah. That's I had another approach, but that's
Okay, say some more. What's your approach for that?
um I that's like I said, it's a draft of an answer because I was wondering in which extent there is a balance to find. In the sense that I had an interesting discussion with a coach, but outside of work, and we were discussing the fact that we are all different and we all have all our approaches and our skills, and there are enough people out there to match the different needs of the different clients, meaning that it can be okay that you only match certain types of mission, and that's where your added value is, and that's where you'll be recognized, and people, clients will come and hire you for that kind of job. Whereas for others, they would rather hire someone that is more in that area. And so it was more like, do you really have to compose, or can't we also just maybe own the core values we have and the special touch we have, and then be recognized for that. But that's
Mm.
of course a bit, I was thinking it's still a bit of an ideal version of it, because in the end you have to make money. You also, you want to make a career, you want to make your name. So yeah, it's finding it's still tricky, but
Well, for me, that I really like the part that you say, okay, it's about creating your own name and creating earning money. That because um, how much I I think a lot of agilists, we want to change the world, but yeah, at the same time, we I still want my kids to eat. I was in Belgium. I lived while I was studying. I lived a couple of years from welfare, so I literally had like almost no money to live. And I yeah, vowed, pledged for myself that I would never. Yeah, I don't want my kids to come into a certain into similar situation. Although I learned a lot, and that's the strange thing is like this is probably something that I've learned so much that I really value. So I don't look negative at that situation. At the same time, I want to avoid my kids to go in that situation. So yeah, it's like I want to get paid for the things I'm doing. I want to get paid at a level that I think is reasonable compared to others. I know that some people make way more money and others make way less money, but it's like finding the balance. Like at this level, I still feel comfortable. I do know some other big agile names that yeah, they're like, I don't know, 10 times more, making 10 times more money for coming into a company. But at that rate, they can't work like 20 days a week in 20 days a month in a company. They'll maybe work 5 days a month in a company, still make more money than me. But I'm like, that's not the kind of level I want to do, because I want to work much more on a day-to-day basis with people. Um, so it's a different kind of value, and it's a different kind of thing. Like, where do I want to go? Is that, yeah, do I want to minimize my time um, in the company, and then how would I say it? Yeah, maximize the money that I'm making, or is that no? I want to, yeah, to help my customers in as much as possible. And I think it's always a little bit, yeah, in between, in a way. You don't want to be um, stupid in a way that, okay, if you say, oh, I just do it for fun, I don't want to be paid, but then you hear that other colleagues are paid in yeah, in a much higher level, yeah, than for the value that you're the same value that you're delivering, that feels kind of strange, of course.
Yeah,
and
it
but
resonates with
it's a
me. Yeah.
balance. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go on.
Yeah, no, but it struck me in the sense that if I understand correctly, you also upfront already kind of had a balance. Like you have your scope, if I can say it, like very high level of what you
I've
want to work on or the approach that you want to have. You said more to be with teams.
let's say that now after, well, I started in the agile world in actually in the beginning of the year 2000. My first encounter with agile was before the year 2000, even before the name agile was even born, or selected. So in that sense, yeah, that's 25 years or something like that. So yeah, that was half of my life. So now I can explain it as if it's all apart and all thought out. This is, of course, where I am now. It's not like, well, in some ways, like I said, when I was living off welfare, I said I don't want to have my kids this. So I made sure from the very first amount of money I made that I set aside. I think from the very first money I made before I was freelance, before I was having my own company, before I was doing agile, the very first money that I think I set somewhere between 10 and 20% of my wage separate, because before I was living off to calculate 375 euros a month. That's what I was living for. The first time that I started to work was probably twice or triple that kind of money, which I never needed before. So I said, I don't want to get used to getting this money. So I set aside a large portion of that amount and still have more money than before. And I realized later that to work, I actually need more money than if I'm studying, because I need to travel to Brussels, and I need to, at some point I need a car and whatever. So I needed more money than I thought I needed. But still, I set aside, and that is a conscious choice that I did right from the start. Uh, but a lot of the other things I discovered along the way. And I said, okay. And so now I make it sound like it was a plan, and that's always a little bit the things. The survivals make it sound like it was a thought out plan, but it's a plan that yeah, that is how things are growing, I would say.
Yeah, but I do like the approach that see again I was saying it black or white or written in stone right
Mhm.
away. But the fact that there is the balance, but there is also the first choices or the refinement you make of where are you gonna have that balance.
Mhm.
So that's definitely interesting thought. Thank you.
Well, that's it's your question that triggered it, so I really like that. It's not the first time that people ask me to answer the question. I'm always like, oh, this is interesting, and I really try to. Well, I've asked a lot of questions, and you were very open to answer it. So I feel yeah, the need is maybe the wrong word, but that it's important that I give the same thing. Yeah. To give back when you ask a question like this. So let's jump into that very last question already. Who do you think I should ask next? And I think you had two names, two people that you want to bring in.
Yeah, I did. So the very first person I thought of is named Alexandra Nicola. So I told you I started as a scrum master
That's
with two
her,
squads.
if
That's
I'm
her.
correct.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very smiling woman, always good energy and cheesy humor, as she likes to say. To not say
Mhm.
shitty humor sometimes, but what? That's her words, not mine. So I started working with two squads, and then different things happened, and I moved to a team of agile coaches, and she is in the lead of that team. And I joined about 8 months ago. She's an agile coach at Proximus with a lot of backgrounds, also as product owner, as scrum master. She worked in different kinds of companies, so she has a very knowledgeable approach when we have different missions at Proximus, and she is very blunt and challenging. So, you know, we are all very kind to each other. I think the community, we support each other. She's very supportive, and she also always finds the tricky questions to make you, like the thought-provoking questions, challenge also the biases we can have, or to think with another perspective. And she also nudged us to think of the more practical aspects of things. You know, we have a lot of wishful thinking, but it's also like, okay, concretely, what do you want to achieve? How do you know you're going to achieve that? So to really like make it more crisp, and that's something very refreshing, also confronting but very refreshing. So that's
It makes me think about the book Radical Candor, because indeed it's the where the author talks about, I can't come up with her name, really shameful, but okay, it doesn't matter. But that author really talks about, indeed, sometimes it's these hard kind of questions to bring out the important truth. And this is not about being unkind. Actually, I think it's in that book or another that I read where it says kind of the opposite. Not asking the questions that need to be asked is unkind. It's not about, okay, if we can help you, or if you can, yeah. It's the example I always give is that um, if you would walk around and you have some, I don't know, some spinach in your tooth, then if I would not tell you and you would walk around for a full day and discover it in the evening, and then I would say, yeah, I saw that this in the morning, you would be really angry at me because, yeah, but I didn't want to tell you, I didn't want to upset you. Well, I think I would have upset you more by letting you walk around for a full day like that. And so that's for me what good questions can be. It's like giving you that mirror, like, hey, you think this, but maybe it's a little more than that. And that is a different kind of kindness. um, but people have to be ready for it. And then I'll bring up another book that I really like, that I've read a year or two ago, that's called Thank You for the Feedback. And I'll link the book also in the show notes. But in that book, it talks about when people, and I need to remember, see if I remember it correctly, but when people want feedback, they're either looking for appraisal, so hey, you're looking good, or things like that, or you're doing a good job. um, they look for coaching, so that's the kind of thing that your colleague is giving you, or they look for what is it, some kind of not appraisal, but a kind of um, feedback that's more about the job, like, okay, that's just kind of I can't come up with the right name, but okay, a third kind of thing. And which is feels very negative for people. So if you're the best thing I can think of is feedback that you might get in a performance review. That's really, it's like a kind of corrective thing, like, hey, this is not really good and you really need to change it. I can't, there is a good name for it, but I
mm-hmm.
can't come up with it. um, but what I've learned, and that's not really in the book, but what I've learned with coaching people around the book is that everybody, well, what's in the book, it says, is that most people have a preferred way of when they talk about getting feedback. They think about one of these three, but real feedback could be one of the, could be all three. Um, but if your preferred way of getting feedback would be, I want appraisal, and you would get coaching, you might actually see it as a kind of performance review thingy, like, hey, you're attacking me or whatever. No, I want to coach you. But if you're looking for appraisal, you don't understand that as coaching. And then it comes very close and people feel very bad. And if people are open for coaching, then things what your colleague does is working perfectly. Um, and that is, I think, the right way of finding out, if you're asking for feedback, what kind of thing you're asking for. I had to, and I'm still learning, I think, the appraisal part. I really like coaching. I really like to have been asked tough questions. And when people give me appraisal, it's still sometimes like, yeah, okay. And so, yeah, I really had to learn to accept that. I'm better at it. I'm still, it's not natural to me. Um, but I think that's an important part. And when you talk about your colleague, then yeah, what Alexandra does is giving you, for me, kind of coaching, asking tough questions, but in which doesn't mean that it's not unkind. At least that's how it sounds. I might be completely wrong, but That's how it sounds to me.
Yeah, that's how I experience it as well. But I know it's not the cup of tea of everyone, so that's indeed yeah, well,
Exactly. That is sometimes a little bit hard. Okay, and you did have a second person. What was the second person you thought about?
yes. Second person is Stéphane Moisan. So that's also someone that I met at Proximus. He's freelance.
So this is
Um,
Stefan, if I'm correct.
this is him. Yeah, yeah, Stéphane. Yeah. From Paris. I met him. He arrived just after me when I arrived in the division where I had two squads, and it was a very intense division. There was a lot of big projects, and we quickly formed, I would say, an alliance into really having each other's back, but also is also a what if person. I think that's at least how I interact with him. So it's more questions like to reframe the world, to think, okay, what can we see differently? How could that be different? And that's really how we built a case when we were in that division to try and give recommendation to those people, and we really worked on that approach of questioning each other, thinking of the what if, what are the other things we didn't think about, and that's a really dear memory of mine from when I was in that division.
Really thankful for that story and that introduction, because yeah, these it already feels like two different kind of people. In although yeah, you worked with both of them. I have not met either of them, which is again for me the interesting part about learning new people. Indeed, that's part of why I'm doing this, of course. So, well, I would. We forgot already to thank Charles Louis who invited you. That's
Yeah.
something we should not forget. But I want to thank you also for your time and for all the energy, because we it's almost spending 2 hours talking with the introduction talk as well. So, Samantha, for people who want to connect to you, what would be a good way to find you?
I think the best way would be through LinkedIn.
And
Yeah.
that should be the link, if I'm correctly.
Yes, that's the link, indeed. Yeah.
So, well, I hope they will find you. I'll, of course, add the link also to the show notes, just as some of the books that we talked about. Really wonderful to spend the evening with you. Yeah, I'm just very grateful that you spent all your spoons, or not. I'm not sure of all your spoons, but at least spent some spoons with me tonight. And yeah, so I can actually say that this conversation gave me energy. It's always interesting to do that, even if it's almost 10 o'clock now or just over 10 o'clock. I still have a lot of energy from talking to you. So thank you very much for that time.
Yeah. I wanted to thank you because you actually gave me little spoons. I was in traffic for 2 hours. So thank you very much for cheering me up, and also for, all the kind of advice. I fished a bit for your opinion on things so that I could have extra things to think about. And I do have to say what was said to me is true. I was like hesitating, having a podcast, discussing, we never met. It really felt like, okay, it's the end of the day and we're just chatting, discussing different things. So it's really comfortable. So thank you very much for
Thank you
that.
for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.